Hello again. So from a kind of different angle this time, which is so much more comfortable, I just thought I would talk about the books I read in November and December because I haven't done that in a while. In November I only read 2 actual books. In the beginning of December I only read 1 book I think, and then in the last week I read 4, or finished 4, because 1 had been taking me a very long time. The first one I read in November was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It's the 1818 edition I read. It was a very interesting story about, Victor Frankenstein, who creates a creature and then is a dick about it, basically. If you haven't read it, you'll probably think that the creature is very creepy. You probably think that the creature is Frankenstein, as everyone does, but actually Frankenstein is, well, the real monster here, but he's like the creator, and he just finds the creature to look so horrific, even though he has like God of the body parts himself, that he abandons it. And then the creature gets mad because, well, he finds it a bit rude, to say the least. He educates himself, which is very interesting. He becomes monstrous because he's treated as a monster, and it's just a story about how monsters are created and perceived, as well as whether you would be allowed to create life. It comes from a perspective of what is the role of religion in society, and in what sense should we be allowed to play God ourselves. It's very interesting. I really enjoyed the writing style. It was some sort of frame narrative. It was basically in letters, but it was such a long letter that you didn't really notice, except for the beginning. But it gave the ending a really nice twist. It basically made a point about whether Frankenstein's obsessive behavior with regard to the creation of this monster, and then the trying to retrieve this monster from the world, whether that's good, this obsessiveness, and it's just very, very interesting. Give this 4 stars. It didn't completely sweep me away. I still really enjoyed it. I found it a very interesting novel. The next one I read was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I had this lying around for ages and I finally picked it up. When I asked for this full Christmas-like thing, I didn't really know what it was about, so that was kind of a shock, as I thought it was a contemporary romance for some fucking reason. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed it. I mean, now I already knew what it was in for. I mean, of course it's really disturbing, but at the same time it's such an interesting perspective and such an interesting point Nabokov makes. It's about Humbert, who is a pedophile, and his obsession with Lolita. But because you read it from his perspective, you get a very strange and distorted view of the scenario, even though you know it's wrong, even though he knows it's wrong. What was also very interesting about this novel was the way Nabokov actually makes a point about what a book should do. Should a book really be an example or give criticism on the bad and put forward the good? Or is it alright to write about something bad and not judge it at all? The writing style, of course, is very beautiful, but I must admit that when I started this initially a few years ago and read the first 70 pages or so, I really loved the writing style and found it a really interesting book. But at some point I got kind of bored and I thought, oh well, that was just my unmotivated, can't finish a book mentality that I had then. But I kind of had the same this time. I didn't put it down, but I found it very hard to continue at times, because just nothing was happening for such a long time. But it's really good, you know, it's such a good book and it deserves to be highly acclaimed. I haven't even said this, but of course it's a terrible thing he writes about and there are some very horrific scenes. But in spite of this, it was still a very interesting novel and a very interesting read. Then I read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck in this really cute edition, look at it. I had sort of never before read John Steinbeck. Maybe I have read The Pearl in school, I think I did. But my English was so bad at that point that I don't really know whether I actually read that, the real version, or some abridged, summary-ish version. It was a very depressing read, but I really want to reread it because I'm really curious. Of Mice and Men is a very short novella-esque thing about Lenny and George, who are friends and are in this Depression era America, just going from job to job, traveling, dreaming of a better life. They basically think that they're the exception because they're together, and together they can finally make that dream come true that everyone dreams of but nobody reaches. And they can have a nice house and a nice life, etc. Lenny is basically really nice, you know, but he doesn't know his own strength. He's really dumb, basically. But he's very lovable and he doesn't mean any harm in any way, ever. So you have him and you have George, who just tries to take care of him because he definitely can't take care of himself. And they go to this new job and they try to make this dream come true. This novel is basically about the Depression era and the way people had to live in that time. It was heartbreaking. I gave this 5 stars. It was just one of the best things to read, but it was so painful. It left me heartbroken. So even though the writing style was really simple, I found it had a great impact in the way that it really strengthened the messages of the book. I also really found it interesting how, as a realist novel, this basically George and Lenny, they come to a farm where they work, and this farm has all kinds of people. I personally felt like it projects society on a small scale, you know? And I found it also really interesting how people of colour were portrayed, as you really see how they are outside of society. Because this 1930s America, I must admit that even though it's awful to read that was the case, as a realist novel, it couldn't have done otherwise, because if it had done so, it would have been a lie. Crooks, I think it was called, lived like in the farm but outside it. I found that was very strong in its accuracy of depicting the real world and also social status of people with disability, for example. Anyway, very good book, 5 stars. And I will certainly be picking up more of Steinbeck's works. I can't wait to revisit The Pearl because I'm so curious, even though I know it will leave me heartbroken. The rest of the books I basically read in the last week when I was finally free and at holiday. The first one I finished, which was the reason that I didn't read much for the rest of the month, was Dubliners by James Joyce, and it took me so long. I keep watching videos by people who say, oh, and I still have this lying around, I don't know why I'm not getting to it. And people keep saying that it's an easy read, even if they have actually read it. I found it anything but. It's a collection of short stories just about the lives of people living in Dublin, because, well, Dubliners. Even though some of the stories really stood out to me as having a great atmosphere, I had a lot of difficulty to extract the meaning that lay behind it. So, well, internet saved me. But there was some which just went over my head. For example, Ivy Day in the Committee Room was basically a story about Irish politics. I'm not very up to date with turn of the century, but not this century, but the past one, Irish politics, because I don't live in Ireland nor live in the 1900s. There were some stories I really loved, for example Araby, which basically was just a small boy who wants to impress a girl and goes to a fair because she said she wanted to go there. The first few stories I really enjoyed, but I tend to have that with short story collections. That's the first few stories I'm really into, and then after a while I'm just bored and want something else, and I still have like 5 stories left. So I really need to figure out what it is with short story collections and me, and how I can avoid this problem, because I really enjoy short stories in themselves. I just don't enjoy them in collections. But every time I read a single short story, I'm just really loving it, you know? And then I read a collection and I'm just like, his writing style is great, by the way. Like, it's James Joyce. I didn't expect any different, but it is. So, yeah. I really want to read Ulysses, but I'm kind of afraid, so I don't know. I'll probably just try a smaller novel of his first. The Portrait of the Artist as Young Man. That's probably the next one. Maybe I'll work up the courage for Ulysses. I don't know. It's just what I'm in the mood for as well. Because I have been really excited for a long time to read Ulysses. Then I read Carrie by Stephen King. This one is his first novel, and I've been reading so much Stephen King lately, and I really enjoy all his novels. It was a bit too YA for me, I felt. I'm not really drawn to narratives about teen girls or teens, the youth. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed it, and it wasn't like this was really a YA book. and I mean I really enjoyed it. It's basically about Carrie, who has like these telekinetic powers and can move things with her will. She's basically Matilda but evil. She goes through a lot of bullying, and her mother is very intense and religious. That was the best part of this book. It was just so creepy how her mother was, basically, and all the backstory is always great with Stephen King. It's not my favorite Stephen King, it's still really good. It's also really short, especially for Stephen King, so if you're just trying to get into him and you kind of like teen narratives, then I would certainly pick this up. It's really gruesome as well, but it was really good. Then I read The Belgia by Sylvia Plath. I finally read this. I've been wanting to read this for years. It's basically about Esther Greenwood, who has this scholarship where she goes to New York and does fashion things, but she gradually falls into depression and she goes back home, and then she really gets depressed, so she goes to a mental institute, and that's basically the story. I must say that I thought I would really enjoy this, and I did. It was good, but it was also a bit boring. On one hand, it had a really good atmosphere, but on the other hand, nothing happened. And the writing style, it was done well, but there were these short intervening sentences, and it's like, I thought it must be the worst thing in the world. And those kinds of sentences, yeah, I was supposed to be having the time of my life. I must be having a real world. On almost every page there's at least one. It wasn't exactly my favorite kind of voice, but still I found that it gave an excellent insight into depression as far as I can point it out. Particularly her view of mental hospitals was interesting, especially since it still dealt with things such as shock treatments. So it was very interesting. I'm really glad I read it, but it was a bit dull at times, you know, but not always. But it's just the things that kind of stuck with me, that it was sometimes dull. So that's never good, even though I know there were a lot of parts which I really enjoyed and I flew through this. It wasn't the best Christmas read, I think, but whatever. So I gave this 4 stars. Maybe this would be 3, I don't know. And then I came to my last book of 2017. Oh my god. So this was a bit of a shit. I had this book lying around for ages, and when I just went to my parents for the holidays and decided, you know what, I'm going to take this book with me. I hope I'll finally get to it, because I wanted to read this for years. I've had this for years, I just never got to it, even though I know when I read the first page I really enjoyed it. So I finally picked it up. I was really happy that I finally did. And it's The Subterraneans and Pig by Jack Kerouac. I've never read anything of his until, well, except for this now. But yeah, this was really racist. It really sucked. Yeah, it was such a shame. I gave this 1 star. This included 2 novellas. One is really tiny, by the way, and I don't know why they did that. Because, for example, if you have this one, The Haunting of Hill House, just nice Penguin Mother Classics edition, and it has this font. And it's really pleasant to read. And then you have this one. But why? Like, why even? This is just ridiculous. Like, this is almost twice as big. The first one, The Subterraneans, deals with Jack Kerouac on another name, but basically Jack Kerouac, who falls in love with a black girl, and he is really racist about it, and it sucks. It was written in stream of consciousness, sort of. It was just really long sentences without interpunction. Even though that's something I would normally really enjoy, I think. It was just a bit, because nothing happened. It was just so boring. He was trying to make the girl he dates represent all people of color, and it was very strange because he was in no position to do so. And then the point was, the second story actually was quite good, wasn't it? That was behind the first one. So the first one was really racist, and then you get to Pig, which is the story of a black young boy who travels to another part of the country because his grandfather passed away, and he gets to stay with his brother, and they just travel to find a job, something like that. And I actually, on the one hand, enjoyed it, and the writing style also was not stream of consciousness. After the first one, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. Kerouac tried to write in some sort of slang. Why are you writing in incorrect English? Is it because you want to represent a dialect? Or is it because you're very degrading of people of color? So I couldn't, yeah, but It was just after the first one it made me feel uncomfortable. On the one hand, I kind of still am curious to read On the Road, but I'm not ready anymore. I wish I had read that one first, because apparently that one's a lot less racist. Not in a while, you know, maybe at some point I will read On the Road, but I don't really want to anymore, ever. What was everything I read in the months of November, December. Hopefully I can cut this short because I'm at 43 minutes right now. Thanks for watching, and please tell me whether you've read some good or just awful books. Please tell me if you have read this one and what you thought of it. I really want to know, especially what people's opinions are on the second story. After reading the first one, I should wrap this up. So thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye!